What's up guys, Shawnthebro here, and in today's episode of the Super Smash Brothers and Platform Fighter tutorial series, we're going to be going over Sudden Death Part 2. So if I come into my game here, and it doesn't really matter what map I pick, but I'll go ahead and pick the one with the map boundary set up properly. I have my round time at 5 seconds, so after 5 seconds we are going to tie because the round ended and nobody had any score. So we go into Sudden Death. We had this set up last time, but we're going to do a few things additional this time that's really going to clean up our Sudden Death. First thing is, we stop respawning when Sudden Death occurs. This is particularly important in timed mode and coin mode. So we have the stock mode, and stock is where you have a certain amount of lives and you won't respawn once those lives are out. Timed mode and coin mode, you have unlimited lives until the time runs out. If we reach a tie in those modes and we want to go to Sudden Death, we want to make it a stock-based match at that point. Essentially, everyone has one stock, and once they get eliminated, they can't come back to Sudden Death. We need to disable the ability to respawn so that when we hit these opponents, go flying off the stage like that, they won't come back afterward, and you can see they're not. So they've been defeated, but they haven't come back. That's what we'd expect in Sudden Death. If I come back into my game and I allow Sudden Death to occur again, we want to do things like stop the character from being in the state they're in. There's even more to that. We actually reset all the blocking parameters, durability of the block shield, remove any stun frames, all these good things that we want to do, because essentially when we go into Sudden Death, we're starting with a clean slate. Yes, we're giving them the 300% on the damage counter, but otherwise it's like a normal match. If you want to get caught up in this playlist and check out everything we've done before this point in time, you can go ahead and click this icon in the top right corner right here, which will lead you to the entire playlist of the Super Smash Brothers tutorial series, and you'll be able to see how we implemented character select, items, respawning, all these good things. Alternatively, if you only care about Sudden Death, that's perfectly fine, but I do recommend you watch the first episode of Sudden Death, which is the previous episode in the series, and I'll link that right here in the top right corner in that iCard. With that out of the way, we can go ahead and get started. So this is a code and blueprint tutorial series. We're going to start in the code today. I'm going to my Visual Studio, and specifically I'm going to my SSB template gamemode.h, or my base gamemode.h. In here I want to add a new parameter, new variable today, that I've called is Sudden Death. So it's a boolean, it determines if Sudden Death is active or not. It's very simple, but it's going to be very useful because when we are in Sudden Death, there's certain things we do and don't want to do. The main one for today's episode is what I mentioned earlier, not being able to respawn. So if Sudden Death is active in the game mode, the characters can't respawn. So you can see, is Sudden Death active? I've made it a U property of edit anywhere, blueprint read write with a category of game mode. Again, that is bool is Sudden Death. The U property here just allows us to edit this in the blueprint and access the value in the blueprint, which we are going to need to do. Now, once we have this in the SSB template gamemode.h, we want to go to the SSB template gamemode.cpp and go to the constructor where we set all the default values for variables. And in here, we want to set is Sudden Death. So I've set at the bottom here is Sudden Death equals false. When the game mode starts up, Sudden Death is not active, so by default it's false. That makes perfect sense. Let's go down to where we were triggering some Sudden Death logic that's also in the game mode. It's in a function called enter Sudden Death. In here, we were calling a function on the characters called prepare for Sudden Death. So this is where we were resetting the character's damage counter to be 300%. We also want to set is Sudden Death to be true in here. So right below that, I say Sudden Death is active, is Sudden Death equals true. But before we go and stop the characters from respawning, let's edit prepare for Sudden Death a little bit more, because there's a lot more we can do with this than just resetting their damage counter. So this is in my SSB template character.cpp, and I'm going to scroll down to my prepare for Sudden Death function. Here we are. So previously, that's the only thing we were doing. I've added a lot more in here today. There's actually still a lot more that we want to do after this as well, but I haven't covered all of it. So the first thing I'm doing is setting the can move variable to be false. When Sudden Death starts, I want to set the characters to not be able to move. Of course they will be able to move shortly after. I just wanted to default them to not moving. It kind of breaks up the logic a little bit. We know that we're resetting their state and everything. But additionally, we are going to transport the characters back to their original spawn locations. And we don't want them to be able to move at that time, so I'm just going to set can move to be false. We'll re-enable it once Sudden Death actually begins. I've also set the lives variable to go to 1 now, Again, in timed mode, coin mode, you don't have lives. In stock, you do. If we are in stock, we do want to set those lives back to the minimum value, which is 1, because it's only 1 stock until we're defeated. That way, if we have HUD elements like our stock counter, that will be reflected properly there. Next up is the block shield information that I mentioned earlier. So the block shield durability, I'm going to reset it back to the max block shield durability. So when we enter sudden death, it's like a clean slate for their block shield as well. So they have the maximum durability, doesn't matter what state they were in prior. And I'm also going to reset their block shield remaining regen frames. This is how long it takes before their block shield can regenerate again. It starts out at 0 in the constructor when the character is spawned. We're just going to set it back to 0. Stun frames is the same deal. We don't want to be stunned when we enter sudden death, so I'm just going to set the stun frames to be 0. Charge time, same deal. We're not charging anymore. If we were charging when it went into sudden death, we're just going to cancel that. We're going to say charge time is 0. Character state, we're going to set them back to the default character state. So character state equals e character state : e_ idle. I'm resetting the last attacker to null pointer. So last attacker, the last character that hit this character. That way, if this character falls off the map, gets eliminated, or even if they self-destruct afterward, the last attacker will be credited for that kill or for that defeat. But when we're entering sudden death, I feel like it's not fair to still count them afterward, so I'm going to reset that to null pointer. This may or may not matter depending on how you handle sudden death in your game, but still I think it's better to reset it instead of just leaving it anyway. I also want to go ahead and grab my block shield component and set the visibility to be hidden, which is making it invisible, and we do so by calling set visibility on our block shield component and pass in false. The reason for this is because when we reset the character state directly, we don't actually call stop blocking, and I don't necessarily want to call stop blocking because we may do things in that function that we don't want to do when resetting for sudden death. But if we were blocking, since we reset their state back to idle, we do want to make sure that the block shield component becomes invisible. Of course, next time we go to block, it will be visible again, so no harm done here. So let's go ahead and launch the editor. Once the editor is back open, we can go into our game mode blueprint, because the game mode blueprint is actually where we handle the respawning of players. So game mode BP, go to my base game mode BP. Now, to be quite frank, this will almost definitely be changed to code in the future like we do with a lot of our blueprint logic, but for now we're going to keep it as is because that's outside the scope of this episode. So we have this event respawn player where we were grabbing the proper player, determining where their revival platform should be, spawning it, attaching them to it, all these important things for respawn, but we don't want to do any of them if it's sudden death. So at the very start of the event, before anything else, I've added 2 nodes. A getter to our boolean that we made earlier in the episode is sudden death, and a branch. So get is sudden death. And we want to bring this into a branch. And only if it's false, if it's not sudden death, do we want to do anything related to respawn. So you see true is empty. We don't do anything here. False goes into the logic that was previously linked up to event respawn player directly. Something else we want to do in here, and that is to allow the characters to be able to move once the sudden death text goes away. So I'm scrolling down to my other event here, display sudden death info. This is what we set up in the previous episode for sudden death. In here we were calling a function on our HUD, display sudden death text. Inside this function we were displaying the actual sudden death text to the HUD, which makes sense, but after that we were setting a timer so that in 3 seconds it would call another event. That event simply just hid the sudden death text that we spawned because we only want to flash it on the screen for a couple seconds toward the player. We don't want it to be in their way the whole time, so we have to remove it. I'm opting to allow the characters to move once the text goes away. So we have this event here called hide sudden death text, and in here we were just setting the text to be invisible. Makes sense. After that, I've added these new nodes, the ones that I have highlighted right here. And this is what's going to enable the characters to be able to move again once that text goes away. So for now, I'm just grabbing my game mode reference, which is something that we have in the character HUD. It just is a reference to our game mode. Grabbing my players array, which contains an array of all the players, all the characters in the match. Looping through them, and for each single character, we're setting can move to be true. All of our characters can move at this point and begin sudden death. There we go, guys. That's a short and simple episode, but very important for our sudden death behavior. In the next sudden death episode, we're going to be going over moving the characters back to their spawn locations when sudden death starts. That way they don't just sit where they were last at like this. I want to actually be able to respawn them, move them back to those starting positions. That way sudden death can begin for real. If this video helps you make sudden death in your game, please subscribe. It does more for myself and the series than anything else you can do, and it is free. I want to give a huge shout out to my YouTube membership, Patreon members, and Discord subscribers. You guys are so kind and you have given me so much support. I am so incredibly grateful for all the love. If you guys ran into any issues while following this episode, feel free to join the Discord community. There's a link in the description, and that support is also free. Anyway, guys, that's all I got for you, so thank you so much for watching. I'm Shawnthebro, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye, guys.